Around a year ago, I visited the town of Cokeville in far western Wyoming in order to tell the history of a miracle that happened here. And I also wanted to give a little bit of backstory because I think the history of this miracle is incredibly fascinating. And it begins with a man named David Young, who was a local in the town. And around 1979, he began realizing that with a population of well under 600, it would be easy for him to find himself in a position of authority. And this was something that he greatly desired because he had delusions of grandeur. So for about 6 months in 1979, he became the town's only police officer. But quickly the town began realizing that he had these delusions, as well as that he was most likely a domestic terrorist, and he quickly was fired and moved to Tucson, Arizona, where he married his wife, Doris Young. Now, these delusions of grandeur and these domestic terrorist ties led him to an organization called Posse Comitatus. Their philosophy and their history is too in-depth to go into, but very briefly, their ideology is that the highest authority of law and the only authority of law that they recognize is the sheriff. So this led to a lot of heat with the FBI and the state troops, and he and his wife found themselves in deep water. And in order to seek help from this, they went and formed ties to the Aryan nations. And it was with the Aryan nations that they began learning how to build bombs and do drugs. And these bombs, I won't go into much detail explaining, but they were very effective and they were very well known in Aryan Nation circles. And basically, how they worked was it created an explosion using gasoline that would vaporize a great amount of fluid along with aluminum powder, fill an enclosed space, a very large one like a room or a school bus, and then detonate with a secondary blasting cap and kill everybody inside of that enclosed space. These were very effective, and David Young and his wife, along with a couple of Aryan nations, actually detonated one of these in the desert inside of a school bus, showing that they had some insidious plans in the works. So, on the evening of May 16th, 1986, around 1 p.m., they pull up at Cokeville Elementary School. And they had a couple of buddies with them that were handcuffed in the back of their van. Basically, these buddies had given them a lot of money in this weird get rich quick scheme that really just amounted to David Young buying a lot of explosives to use for this attack, as well as illegally sourcing several weapons because he used 4 rifles and 8 pistols in the attack as well. And he walked into the school office and handed them a manifesto entitled Zero Equals Infinity. I've tried reading this manifesto and I can't make any sense of it at all. The man was clearly on drugs. And meanwhile, his wife was walking room to room, and she gathered up all of the people in the building as hostages, telling them basically, oh, there's an assembly, there's a meeting, there's an emergency drill, just getting everybody to comply and go in the room. By the end of this, there were 136 kids, 6 faculty, 9 teachers, and 3 just random people who were in the school, including a UPS driver and someone who was applying to a job. In total, they had 154 hostages, and they started issuing their demands. They wanted an audience with President Ronald Reagan and $2 million per hostage. And this obviously wasn't going to happen, and with the bomb being so volatile because its main component was gasoline, a lot of the kids started developing headaches. And because David Young was very likely already on drugs, he was tweaking out of his mind. And the bomb detonation switch was actually tied to his wrist. So he was gesturing and making all of these movements, and everybody knew that one wrong move meant certain death, but at the same time, nobody wanted to confront him because they were afraid that he would go off the rails. And they started noticing that he was sweating very heavily. And eventually, an adult approached and asked, would it be okay if I set up this 8 foot by 8 foot square around you? And he said, yes, keep the kids away from me. And even though they did this, the kids sat right at the edge of the square and stared David Young in the face, which set him even more off. He was very, very nervous. He was sweating bullets. So he transferred the bomb over to his wife's wrist. She was developing a headache, and everybody else was at the time, and the kids had started praying at this point. And when he transferred it to his wife's wrist, he said he would be gone for just a few moments while he used the bathroom. Police and family members of the kids surrounded the school because it was a small town, and it was only a 5 minute walk from anywhere in town to actually get to the building. And there was a media circus outside just watching and waiting to see what would happen. Well, the wife developed a headache and reached up to touch her head, and immediately the bomb detonated. Now, what the students described later, after the incident, was that it looked like a group of white figures in robes actually surrounded the bomb, lifted it up, and shielded it from detonating. But what most people saw in the immediate reports, especially from teachers, where it really did look like this bomb kind of had a delayed explosion and it jumped in the air and exploded closer to the ceiling. The room filled with smoke, and there were partial fires all throughout the room, but nobody was really hurt to the point of dying, except for Doris Young, who was burned very badly. And hearing this explosion, David Young ran out of the bathroom and shot his wife in the head immediately. He then saw a teacher trying to leave, because you got to remember, these teachers were forcing the students out of the room, trying to evacuate as quickly as possible. It was a stampede. He shot this teacher, but the teacher was okay. And then David Young ran back to the bathroom, locked the door, and shot himself in the head. And it's said that the miracle was that of these 154 hostages, nobody died. And later on, the students reported that it was only after they began praying that the bomb lifted up and detonated. And the town basically came together. It was a very heavily religious Latter day Saints town, not too far away from Utah. So the town really united under this. And even to this day, there's this attitude of really great religious observance around this school. And in 2015, a movie was made, and I think it would be interesting to kind of watch a couple scenes. If you're ever in the region of western Wyoming, I would really recommend visiting the town of Cokeville. And it's not too far along the railroad tracks, also from the town of Sage, Wyoming, which is a really beautiful ghost town, which appears prominently in some literature. But if you take a look around, you can see beautiful open blue skies, endless pastures and prairies and plains and farms, and just it's beautiful, beautiful country. It's God's country.